Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Carrie. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm from the peer support team. I'm looking forward to today's presentation, which will be led by the peers from the Party in the Right Spirit team. If you'd like to introduce yourselves, we can start with Elizabeth.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming today. My name is Elizabeth. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm from the Party in the Right Spirit team.
And next we have Priyanshi.
Hi, everyone. My name is Priyanshi. I am from the Party in the Right Spirit team, and I use she, her pronouns.
Thank you. So, with smart devices becoming more widely available than ever, gambling and gaming platforms have become increasingly popular. So today's presentation will explore the risks and strategies that we can think of so that we have the information we need to make informed decisions around both gambling and gaming. We also have with us a special guest from the Responsible Gambling Council, Lisa, who will be sharing information around gambling. Our peers from the Party in the Right Spirit team will cover information around gaming. So next, we'd like to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. So we invite you to reflect and learn about the native land you are currently on, and your story of how you came to be on that land. And now over to Priyanshi.
So for today's agenda, first we will have Lisa from Responsible Gambling Council, or RGC, who will present what is gambling, the types of gambling, common myths and risks, and some tips for safer gambling. Then Party in the Right Spirit team members will go over some tips on gaming during quarantine, balancing school and gaming, and provide some resources for support. So I'm going to hand it over to Lisa now.
Excellent. Good morning, everybody. My name is Lisa Kupris, and I use she and her pronouns. I am so excited to be here, probably more excited than I should be, but I think the COVID situation and lockdown has made me very excited to actually interact with people. I have a long history of being involved in prevention work. I've always been very interested in social issues. In fact, I was one of the original members of a group called SAD, which stood for Students Against Drunk Driving. And I helped organize the organization in Canada, doing conferences and programming around that when it first began. I then moved into alcohol issue programming for college and university students when I was there. And I moved on from that issue to working in the field of gambling. So I've spent, fortunately, I've spent my whole career designing and producing and creating programs for students and young adults around the prevention of alcohol problems and gambling problems. I want to start by thanking the fantastic team with Party in the Right Spirit and for extending the invitation to both RGC and myself to participate today. I love chatting with students. I love to hear what you have to say. I love the debate that comes from the dialogue and the discussion about certain topics. So I'm hoping you'll be able to make use of the chat box today about your comments and maybe even some questions. And we'll do our best to manage those as we go through today's session and as we go along. I'd also love for you to participate and engage with us. We've got some poll questions around some trivia about the topic. And finally, I really hope that you find this interesting and that you learn something in a really easy and fun way. What I'd like to do is leave you with an increased knowledge about gambling overall. I do want to drill down today and focus on some of the gambling effects and some impacts that are specific to 18 to 24-year-olds in particular. And like the agenda said, we're going to talk about some key concepts, myths around gambling, signs of gambling, and if you do participate, what kind of things are you doing to keep it safer? So that's in a nutshell what I'd like to do today. And hopefully you'll enjoy the session as well. So let me tell you a little bit about RGC and what it is that we do. So RGC stands for the Responsible Gambling Council. We are an independent nonprofit organization, and we've been doing this sort of work for more than 35 years. Our mission is to prevent problem gambling and to reduce its impacts. And in order to do that, we work in 4 key areas. One is research. So a large part of what we do is we have a full department that deals with nothing but research, researching the best training that's available, working on prevalence studies and other research studies. And we're going to talk about one of our COVID study that has up-to-date information on online gambling. So everything that we create is evidence-based, and we're very fortunate to have a really excellent research department here at RGC. The other thing that one of our main areas of work is in something called accreditation. And so what we do is our organization physically goes into land-based or does online almost like exams or tests with people who run gambling around the world. And so we evaluate or test these people on their responsible gambling initiatives, both in land-based and online. What, for example, responsible gambling programs do they have in place so people don't get into trouble? And we evaluate on a number of criteria, and organizations who run gambling are accredited if they have excellent RG programs in place, or if they fail, they have a way to increase or make better the programs they offer so they can get up to a certain levels to provide gambling in a responsible and safe managed way. We also provide quite a lot of information to people. For example, every week we email a weekly e-bulletin that keeps people abreast on the latest happenings around problem gambling or responsible gambling around the world. We also have an excellent website, responsiblegambling.org, that we invite you to go and visit if you're looking for information. It's broken out in different languages. There's help around nationally or international or even local. It's broken out on age groups, so there really is quite a lot of information there. And then the final pillar, or the 4 main expertise areas we have, is around prevention, and that's part of what I do. But we do conferences where we bring people together from around the world, and we do specific programming, both high school, post-secondary, which I'm going to focus on as part of my session today, and also going out into the community as well. The last part I want to say is that we work with everybody. So with our neutral or independent stance, we bring everyone together to talk about how to prevent problem gambling. It's the public, it's treatment providers, it's people who operate gambling, it's regulators who make sure gambling is done in a fair manner, and it's policy and government makers. So we really are a bridge builder in terms of bringing people together and how do we work together to work on preventing problem gambling. Now, bear with me, everybody, because I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but I do want to make sure people understand a very basic understanding of gambling in the province of Ontario. So I do want to say it's a legal activity. We're not anti-gambling or pro-gambling. We're very neutral, but it is a legal activity depending on what activity you're gambling on, and it's for 18-year-olds or 19-year-olds, again, depending on the activity. It's also regulated, which means that the AGCO, the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, regulates gambling so that it's fair and consistent to people who play. You all might have heard of OLG, or the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation. That's the organization who runs gambling in the province of Ontario. And any revenue or money that's spent on gambling by the public goes to the Ministry of Finance or the Government of Ontario, and a portion of those monies are given to the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, who oversees gambling prevention in the province of Ontario. So I do want to just give you that little bit of understanding of how that works. But now I'd like you to get ready to try and participate in our first poll. So here we go. Please use the chat box. And so here's our question for this morning, the first one. What year was gambling, or do you think gambling was legalized in Canada? 1975, to coincide with the launch of Ontario's first lottery called Wintario. 1918, and it was used to raise money or support post-war efforts. 1910, to allow games of chance at local fairs or maybe other things. 1969, to coincide with the launch of Canada Bill of Rights, one being the right to gamble. And then finally, this is a lot to process so early in the presentation. So take a guess, or maybe you know, and let me know, and we'll see where your answers were. All right, is that everybody? Oh my goodness. Okay, so really interesting. Most people chose number 2, but really a lot of different answers here. But the answer is actually 3. So gambling has been legal in Canada for just over 100 years. So 1910, they allowed games of chance at local fairs. So you've probably heard as groups would come to town and they'd go out and play. What other activities do you think, or what kind of other gambling activities, if you think back to the early 1900s, what other games or activities might people play? And just think about the time frame and put your answers in the chat box, please. Okay. I wonder if so. I'm not seeing the chat box, unfortunately. Maybe I have to close it first. Okay, well, I'm going to keep talking. So some of the things that happened is that in 1910, the Canada Criminal Code was amended to allow what they call pari-mutuel betting, which is for horse racing. So that makes sense that people would probably bet on horse races at that time. They also allowed betting or gambling on bingo, so and lotteries. So what we would say about that is that these offerings at that time were probably a slower type of gambling, or even maybe some people would say it's a safer type of gambling. So later on in this presentation, we're going to talk about how differently gambling and things look now. And maybe we're going to talk too about some of the newer types of gambling and how that may lead to additional problems or riskier behavior. So, okay, let's move on to the next one. We're going to go to poll or trivia number 2. All right, so now we're going to talk about the definition of gambling. So giving you 4 options here. Is gambling risking something of value and an uncertain outcome? Gambling is taking part in any game or activity where you risk money in order to win more money. Gambling is risking money to participate in games, both online, in person, or between friends in order to make even more money. Or 4, is this a trick question? All of these are saying the same thing. So let me know what you think. I think we'll just give it a second. Okay. All right, there's a couple of people who haven't voted. Oh, there we are. Okay. So everyone's voted, and excellent. I'm so pleased you guys chose the right answer. So gambling is risking something of value and an uncertain outcome. And so what we have found talking to students on campus is to be really clear about what gambling is and isn't. And so that definition really shows you three things that I wanted to just quickly touch on. Gambling is risking. And so what we mean by that is that gambling always has an element of risk. No matter what people tell you, the skills they have, the knowledge they have, gambling always has a risk. The second part is that risking something of value. So don't, when you're thinking about gambling, whether yourself or people you know, it's not always gambling with money. So people might have things that are important to them that they would put up as a bet, an iPhone, something like that. So it's something that's valuable to you. And then the third and final point I want to make is that it's an uncertain outcome, meaning there's no guarantee you're going to get your money back, let alone a guarantee that you're going to win. So it's an uncertain outcome. So that's excellent. So just to talk about this a little bit more, maybe some people have heard this before, is there a difference between betting and gambling? Have you heard people talk about that? Maybe they were, is there a less risky type of gambling that you can think of? Okay, so let me start then. Do you think that there's more risk potentially attached with buying lottery tickets or playing slot machines? Absolutely. So you're starting to understand what we're getting at here. So when we think of things that might be less risky types of gambling, and that some people, they think of maybe their mother buying lottery tickets and they have their set numbers that they play every week, and they play once a week. So it's something that's very much slower paced, whereas something like playing slot machines, they could be faster. What about going to a casino? Would you consider that betting, or would you consider that gambling? Excellent. Yeah, absolutely gambling. But what's important here is to know that there's risks associated with all types of gambling, whether it's lottery, but I just go to the casino for the food and free drinks. Okay. If you can set and stick to your limits, that's excellent. What we wanted to be clear here about what gambling is and isn't, is that we want to make sure that all gambling is considered gambling. There's risks when you're using money, when you're risking something of value. So whether it's something that might be perceived as riskier than others, please know that there can be problems associated with all types of gambling. What we're really interested in, and what I'm going to continue to talk about today, is how these types of thoughts impact young adults. And so statistically, we know that 50% of young adults, so half of people who gamble with their friends on sports, they don't consider it gambling. So even though they're putting out money, because there's a friend element, they don't consider it gambling. And other 29% of young adults said that when they play or gamble on fantasy sports websites, it's not considered gambling either. So there's some kind of generalization or easing of what gambling is, depending on the type of activity. So let's try and keep that in mind. So if there's that kind of blurring there between betting and gambling, let me ask you this. Okay. Are gambling and playing video games the same thing? And I'm going to ask you to think about that for a minute. And we'll go through some yes and no why you think. that gambling and playing video games could be the same thing. So I'm going to do the chat box again. Any idea? Okay, Jason, depends on the video game. So let's say yes, Jason or somebody else. What could be, if they're the same things, what might be some of those similarities between gambling and video game play? Addiction, okay. Risking something of value. Any game that offers in-game. Okay. You guys know some stuff about this, which is excellent. So some of the things where we would think, okay, this could be considered the same thing is playing video games and gambling you can do using the same device, like your phone. They both have elements of skill attached to them, right? So there's that part. There's randomness within both. We know that too. As a chance of increased success. Yeah, Jason, you're touching on these excellent points. Thank you. There's occasional reinforcements to keep you playing. You might win something back, some coins or something like that. They're visually stimulating. So when you're playing video games, you're interested. It's got good graphics. It's got audio or music. Same thing with gambling. It makes reinforcing your need to play. And then I do want to talk about loot boxes that Jason brought up. So thank you so much for that. We know most, and you've probably heard this, is video games make a lot of money using loot boxes. What is the discussion now that's happening around the world is whether loot boxes are considered gambling, because they do have gambling-like elements. So you purchase a loot box, you don't know what's in it. It could be super valuable, or maybe it's not valuable once you've purchased it. Certain countries in the world have already determined that they are gambling, and they've gone back to game developers and asked them to remove the element from the games or be considered a gambling activity. So places like Belgium have done it, China, and the rest of the world is actually looking into whether or not they will remove this component. So there's some reasons right there on why we might argue that gambling and playing video games are the same thing. So let's turn the page and say, why would we say no? And someone said it earlier, Kashiga, I'm hoping I'm saying your name correctly. You've got it exactly right. So excellent. That's taken directly from the definition of gambling, is that you're not risking something of value. And that's why it's not considered gambling here in Ontario. What I do want to leave you with, though, is the link between gambling and gaming is becoming more and more blurry. And we can see this in consequences, which are things like you're enticing players to spend more time or more money than you anticipated spending. You're neglecting friends and family because you want to play more often. Or perhaps you're skipping classes in order to play longer. And as I even touch on those things, I'm sure all of you are thinking, that sounds pretty familiar to another activity that we're talking about. So I'm going to leave you with some information here that, again, I just want to share with you, and something that RGC is continuing to track for research purposes, is that we know 94% of young adults who gamble have played video games in their lifetime. So they do like to do both. Nearly half of young adults spent money while playing video games. So are they buying items for their avatar, buying more coins or more gold, something to that effect? Something of big concern to us, and why we continue to talk about this in terms of what we do, is we're starting to see that gamblers with moderate or severe gambling problems have more frequent video game play. So that's of concern to us, of course, and that 22% of young adults who gamble, play video games for money at least once a week. So I did want to talk about some of these similarities between gambling and video games, but I know that the Party in the Right Spirit team is going to drill down a little bit more on gaming towards the end of this session. So for now, let's move into our next trivia question. Number 3, okay, in Ontario, how much revenue do you think came from gambling in 2017-18? 5.5 billion, 10.3 billion, 1.7 billion, and 7.5 billion, or none? These all seem a little bit too high. Okay, we see the answers coming in, so that's excellent. Oh, it's neck and neck with some. Wow, okay. I'm not sure I ever saw this before, that everybody thought it was something different. Oh gosh. Sorry, I'm having trouble moving between the chat box, so bear with me. So I want to ask you, because we're all over the place here, everything from the highest at 10.3 to the lowest at 1.7, and that's quite a swing. Did you think this number was higher than you thought or lower than you thought it would be when you think of how many people would gamble or maybe what they would spend? I think we'll probably get a variety of answers here, but do you think it's high? Do you think it's low? You thought it was lower? Okay. Anybody think it was higher? I know many people spend a lot, yeah. I thought higher. Okay, fair enough. I choose the lowest, but I think it's higher than that. Fair enough. So the answer is actually number 4. So in that year, $7.58 billion revenue was made in the province of Ontario. So when I think of that, I think it's quite extraordinary. But like some of you have pointed out, a lot of people do gamble, whether it's going to a bingo, buying a weekly lottery ticket, betting on sports. So where do you think that money goes to? So we talked at the beginning, we know the money, any revenue that comes through the OLG gaming facilities or goes to the government of Ontario. But I do, again, this is part of this knowledge I want you to know, is what do we do with that money once it goes to the government of Ontario? And the main ways it's distributed is it goes towards the operations of hospitals, as well as other provincial priorities, so whatever the government determines a priority for spending. It's also distributed to local and provincial charities through the Ontario Trillium Foundation, so people apply for funding to do good works in their communities. The third major area that the money gets spent in is in support of our amateur athletes through the Quest for Gold program. Yeah, it is. And the final one is that monies go towards research, prevention, and treatment of problem gambling through to organizations like the YMCA, CAMH, who you're probably familiar with, and our organization, the Responsible Gambling Council. And that's in order for us to be able to do the type of work that we're doing. Each year, a lump of money or a sum lump of money is dedicated towards research, prevention, and treatment. And 2 years ago, that money amount was about $40 million. So that's specifically going towards, yes, it does go to research, prevention, and the treatment of problem gambling. What I do want to leave you with that's really interesting, I think, is that Ontario was able to integrate a government policy that a set amount of money every year would go towards these efforts since they opened the first casino in 1994. And because there's been such a long commitment to putting monies aside for prevention work, Ontario, I would say, is probably one of the leading provinces in the world when it comes to this type of work. So different countries and organizations come to RGC to learn about the programs that we're doing, so they in turn can take it back to their countries, having learned what some of our mistakes were, how we made things better. So we're very proud of the programs that we do, and that our programs get taken to other parts of the world. So I'm seeing here, it's interesting, it goes to research, didn't know where it went. So gamblers can argue that they are helping the government by engaging in this activity. Yes, so sure. I certainly have supported organizations in my community by buying raffle tickets and things. That goes back to my community to support fundraising efforts. It's a legal activity, so you're able to participate and support endeavors that are happening. What we want to do is make sure the people who have problems or people we know who are at risk of developing problems, that we're getting in front of this. We're going into schools and into communities to prevent problems from happening. So yeah, I did want to recognize what you're saying there. All right, so part of what I do is I go onto campuses across Ontario to deliver programs, and part of it is making sure that people understand what are types of gambling. And some people, they're not quite sure what actually is gambling. So I want to make sure that we spend some time in the chat box knowing what are gambling. Think about people you know, maybe something that you do, a family member, a friend. Just start in the chat box telling me so I can get an idea of what types of gambling you're aware of. I imagine this will be an easier one to do, or I hope it is. Lottery tickets, $6.49. Yeah, absolutely. So everyone's got lottery tickets. Yeah, been around for, well over 100 years. Maybe you buy them yourselves or your parents do. So what else is there? So lottery tickets. What other tickets might there be that you do? Okay, someone's saying slot machines. Absolutely. Poker. Yep, great one, Jason. Excellent. Betting on sports, raffles. Yep, that's another way of raising money, but also participating in gambling. Oh, scratch tickets. Yep, very much so. What might be something that you're not necessarily doing, but others might be doing, and thinking it's risking something of value on an uncertain outcome. So we've got slot machines, we've got lotteries, all sorts of raffles and draws. What else would there be? Sports betting, Jason, I think you touched on that. I've mentioned a few things earlier in the presentation. Yep, spinning wheel game, sure. Okay, some of the other things that I would mention, and I'm going to say here, is here some of the more traditional or well-known that you might know about and maybe not. So bingo, I'm sure people have heard of that. I'm not sure if you're participating in it. Blackjack and other card games, poker, sitting around the table with friends and playing, going to a casino and playing as well. Betting on horses, we know that for sure. Dice, playing dice for money. Friendly wagers, so thinking about wagers between friends. And what I also want to do is touch on something that might be considered gambling or something else. So things like the stock market. So you're going to buy some stock. Is there any guarantee that you're going to make money or even get your money back? No. So stock market, playing the stock market's definitely gambling. Esports, this charitable gaming where you're playing electric bingo, all these types of stuff, all sorts of newer types of gambling. Absolutely. So when you look at this list, everybody, and we talked about sort of risky or less risky, I'm now going to have you think about, are any of these games of pure chance? And what I mean by that is that, are there any that are completely random and there's not a chance that you can increase your chance of winning or your odds of winning? So looking at this list, what would be games of pure chance? Lotto tickets, yeah. So you can play your favorite lottery numbers or play the same numbers week after week. There's nothing that you can do to increase your chances of winning. Bingo's completely random as well. Yeah, excellent, good answer. Yeah. Struck by lightning, yes, okay. Scratch tickets, yes, you can't impact any of those. So let's just touch a little bit more about people who argue that they have the skills to increase their chances of winning. So are there anything on this list that you would consider that they're games that contain chance but also contain skill? And that means your knowledge or your skill can increase the odds that you may win. So is there any here? Okay, horse betting, stock market. Okay, so horse betting. So let's think about that. So if you're thinking you have some knowledge, maybe the horse is of a certain age, maybe it has a history of winning in certain climates, maybe or on certain tracks, or there's a rider. So maybe there are some elements that you can study and you can increase the chances of potentially winning, but there's also a randomness part of it. So there is no guarantee, but there would be some skill attached to that or some knowledge. So that's a good answer. Stock market, same thing. So you can look at the history of the stock, who's backing the stock, and think, oh, that's probably a good chance that that will continue to increase in price. Now, I'll say that there's also a chance that something happens outside of the realm and you could lose your money. So there is still that element of risk and an uncertain outcome, but there is parts of a knowledge or skill. Same thing about sports betting. We would look at that and think, okay, there's some skill or knowledge attached to that as well. What we want you to remember is if you do choose to participate in some of these activities, know when it's completely random and that no matter if you have some knowledge or skill at these activities, there's still the element of the unknown. I would argue when we look at sort of the gambling or something else list and the traditional well-known, what we talked about at the beginning of the session of the kind of activities you could play at a local fair looks a lot different right now. And so as we continue to drill down to know which games are chance, which has skill, which gambling activities are riskier, like online poker or electronic gaming machines, because we know they're riskier, they're faster paced, they involve frequent betting, they encourage you to play longer and more often. We know that those are riskier compared to something like lottery tickets, which aren't done quite as often and are slower pace. So that's really great. You guys did a good job coming up with these kinds of activities and understanding what might be what's some difference between pure chance and types of gambling that include some skill attached to it. So thanks so much. That's really, really great. All right, so trivia question number 4 is, what percentage of 18 to 24-year-olds have a gambling problem? So 1.8, 7.1, 3.3, 0.6, or 5.5. So let's see what your answers are for that one. Okay, we're almost all there. I'm going to have a little sip of water. Okay. Excellent. Okay, so the majority of people here think it is answer number 5, about 5% or 5.5%. So would you be surprised to know it's actually the highest one on that list at 7.1%? Does anybody think that? You guys all thought it was lower. Did you think there was another age group that was at higher risk? Or now that you think about it, you think, okay, that's fair. My grandma's age group, yeah. That's one of those myths about gambling as well, that everybody is making assumptions at. So we do know there's risky behavior, problematic behaviors for the senior age, and the problems are different. So if you think of somebody who's your grandmother or the older age group, if they get into trouble with gambling, there's certainly different issues associated with that, because chances are they're not working anymore. So if they use their retirement money for gambling, they don't have a chance to earn that back. Whereas if you're younger, you can still have your career ahead of you to make some of that money back that you've lost. But in fact, the age group at highest risk is 18 to 24-year-olds. So it's why we make such a focus from RGC to go out and talk to this age group. And so when we think about why people are at an increased risk in this age group, we think about things like your brain is still under development. Your emotions and logic isn't fully formed. So that means that your decision-making abilities haven't yet matured. And it means you're more likely to take risks or act impulsively. Being in that age group, 18 to 24, you're probably experimenting with a whole bunch of things. Sexual partners, alcohol use, and gambling is usually just one of those things as well. For us, we want to make sure we continually do outreach and programs for this age group, because even though on average 7.1% of young adults have a gambling problem, that rate, when you pull out just young men, it's significantly higher. We also know that young men are more likely than young women to gamble, to get a high feeling, or to forget their worries. So you're using gambling to escape the things that bother you. We know generally overall in this age group, 32% feel guilty about their gambling. So here's something that's supposed to be entertainment and you're using it for fun, and you participate in it, and then 32% of you then feel bad or feel guilty that you participated. So there's some poor choices being made there. 64% of young adults are gambling in order to earn money. And I'm going to drill down on this topic a little bit later on. 27% of you went back another day to chase losses or to win back money that you already lost. So you've lost money, and then you're like, I need to get it back and make more. So you go and gamble again. But the way gambling is set up, somebody does win, of course, but the chances is the house wins more than you do. So it can start this cycle of loss that would be very concerning to us. And then almost just over 20% of young adults bet more than they can afford to lose. So you're spending more money than you should on gambling. So that's really where RGC, when we drill down into these research issues or what we're seeing statistically, is we really will continue to focus on doing programming that targets this age group so they know about some risks, start to recognize signs, and of course share where you can get help or talk to somebody. And then finally, just before I move on from this topic, when we gave a list of 8 different health issues to young adults and we asked them to rank them from serious to least serious, so things like sexual behavior, alcohol or drug use, gambling, they said that gambling was the second least serious issue. So for us, we need to certainly do some work that reflects how serious an issue that gambling can be for folks. So I just, keeping along that same sort of themes around problem gambling that I introduced on the last slide, and I want to really get you guys thinking too about recognizing some of the signs of gambling. I'm going to show you one of the social ads that we're distributing on campus through our campus contacts. So I'm just going to play this for you, and then we're going to talk about what are some signs of problem gambling that you could recognize. So we'll start with this one. Okay. So what did you see in there in terms of what are some of the signs of problem gambling? What did you see that we scrolled through? Yeah, so certainly lying about the money spent gambling, we would be very concerned about that and would definitely think that was a sign. The other part, and maybe you've heard people say this, is people lie about how much money they're winning or losing. So that's an element attached to that money as well. People talk about their wins and never talk about their losses, and that would be something we would look out for as well. So excellent, Angelica, that's great. Spending more time away from friends, it's definitely a concern. Absolutely. Withdrawing from your friends or your family, you're supposed to meet them, you're going to dinner, you're doing something, and you don't show up because you're gambling. That's excellent. The other part we want to touch on is feeling depressed or guilty about your gambling. That would make you feel like the decisions you're making around your gambling, and whether it's surrounding money or time, that guilt or feeling depressed about it would be a sign. There are some other signs that we certainly want you to recognize or be aware of, whether it's something you see in yourself or whether it's something that you can see in a partner or a girlfriend, boyfriend, or maybe even a roommate. What might be some other signs if you thought somebody had a problem with gambling? So I'm just going to check the chat box and see what people are responding. So we talked about money, spending more time gambling. Absolutely. We would be concerned about that. The other part of that is that you're thinking about or even potentially gambling more and more. When can I gamble again? Where can I get the money to gamble again? Thinking ahead to it. So we would be very concerned about spending more time than intended or thinking about gambling more often. Being out all the time and not letting people they live with know. I think for sure you would be concerned and about where are they going? What are they doing? Are they hiding something? Are they safe? You'd certainly want to open up a discussion about that for sure. Spending more than you earn or have. Yeah, we really we want to think about gambling as a way of a legal activity. And so if you're going to participate in it, are you setting aside and using money taken from your entertainment budget? So excellent is spending more money. Other things we would look at is things like, are you borrowing or are you stealing money from others in order to gamble? That would definitely be a sign. And then lastly, we would say, is there poor nutrition or health? And is your sleep patterns impacted? So all of that would be something that we would be aware of. So I'm getting a question here. What about safer gambling? It's no different than regular gambling. I'm not sure what you would consider regular gambling, but we certainly are going to talk about some safer tips a little bit later on in the presentation. So we can come back to that if what you determine as regular gambling would be safer gambling, and if not, we can chat about that some more. So thank you for that comment. Okay, so let's talk about some of those myths and misconceptions about gambling. So what is something you might know about gambling or think you know about gambling that might be a risk? And I'll just get you started because I think this topic can sometimes be a little bit difficult for folks to get their heads around. So things about, is there physical? Is there things that are emotional, or are there other things that are some myths and misconceptions about gambling? And I can start us off. So you only get excited when you win. Is that true or false? You think that's a myth? Myth. Hannah says it's a myth very quickly. You're exactly right. In fact, whether you win or lose, there are usually body responses to that. You get anxious, you get sweaty, maybe your face gets flushed, your brain responds that you want to, it sometimes makes you want to gamble again. I need to do better, I want to win. So definitely great answer there. What about emotional? Do you think that your emotions play any role in gambling? Is that a myth or a fact? Emotions have nothing to do with your gambling. Okay, fact. In fact, your emotions play a big role in gambling. So we definitely look for your heightened emotional responses because that can certainly impact your decision making when you're deciding to gamble. What about gambling is risky, but video games are just for fun? Is there any truth to that gambling is risky, but there's no risk associated with video games? Myth. Yeah, excellent. Yeah, absolutely. So no doubt, playing video games is fun. You know, there's some benefits to it. I know the Parting the Right Spirit team are going to talk about that. But there's also the same risks as gambling, and that's inability to stop, poor eating, sleep difficulties, skipping friends and family commitments, or even school. So definitely that's a myth there. We have, through our program called Check Your Reflex, we were touring a video game to schools across Ontario, and people would play a video game of ours called Check Your Reflex, and it had 3 levels to it, and every level of the game got progressively harder and progressively louder. And using a joystick, you would play the game. And at the end of it, you got a message. And what people didn't know is when you were playing that game, we were doing your skin responses. And a lot of people that as they played the game and it got harder and more difficult, they got more panicked, their hands started to sweat. And the idea is we want to make people aware that some of those feelings when you're playing a video game can happen to you when you're gambling. So we want you to be aware of how your body or how your brain might affect you when you play, so that you can be aware of it and make good decisions ahead of time and stick to those decisions if you decide to play. Right now, the Check Your Reflex game is available online. And if you want, you can go and play the game. Even though we can't give you your skin response, you can still get the messaging, play the game, and enter to win our contest that's attached to that. So last trivia question for you folks. Here we go. So number 5. Which of these is not a risk for young adults in gambling? Exceeding the amount of time or money you set for yourself, skipping classes or work in order to gamble, using money set aside for tuition, rent, or other bills, increasing your cannabis or alcohol use while gambling, or not washing your computer keyboard all year. So, okay. All right, either people have had it with our jokes or... Excellent. So number 5 is definitely not a risk associated with gambling. So all of these, the first 4 things that you should see here, all of these would be risks associated for young adults and their gambling, and what we'd like to see you avoid doing. So we're starting to talk about the idea that if you're going to gamble, maybe you want to look at how to limit your alcohol or drug use if you do either of those things, because the increased or a large amount of alcohol or cannabis could impact the decisions you make around gambling, how much you spend or how much time you're there. We want you to use entertainment money to gamble if you choose to do so. Do not use your tuition money, book money, rent, food, that kind of thing. Don't skip classes, of course, and don't exceed the boundaries you've set for yourself. So, excellent. You guys are great at that one. And then finally, I just do want to touch on COVID-19. These last 10 months has been a lot. And we're learning a lot about this. RGC, as I told you, has a really great research department. I am sharing with you, this is data from the first wave of a 3-wave research study that we're doing. And I want to just highlight 4 key things that are we want people to be aware of, and certainly how the pandemic has impacted young adults and online gambling. So from this first wave of research, what we have seen from young adults, 18 to 24-year-olds, is that they have a lower life satisfaction than any other age group. Now, if we look at past research that's been done, we know that those with mental health concerns, those with a low life satisfaction, as well as being of youth age, those are risk factors for gambling problems. So we're very much concerned about how can we get or make life satisfaction higher amongst young adults. Next, anxiety is correlated with online gambling. So What we found in this data is that those with a moderate or severe anxiety were at high risk for problems with online gambling. Even more strongly correlated is that 25% who have moderate depression or moderately severe depression and 31% with severe depression were screened as high risk as well. And one of the most significant factors associated with online gambling that's risky, so included being motivated to gamble because when they're feeling nervous or depressed. So using gambling to try and make yourself feel better or make you feel less depressed is definitely risky behaviors. And then finally, financial. And this took me a bit of surprise when this came back via the study, is that when we asked people if their household income had been negatively affected by COVID, 18 to 24-year-olds were the most impacted group. This is particularly troubling, given that when we talked earlier in the session, is 64% of young adults are using gambling in order to make money. So we would be very concerned and certainly watching to make sure that people aren't gambling in order to earn money to help support the household. We will be releasing the rest of that data, the next 2 waves, probably in the next several months, and I'm very interested to know how that might impact the prevention initiatives that we do. So, what can we do? Simply set a money limit and stick to it. It's the most popular thing that you can do, and if you set a money limit and stick to it, that will help you be successful. We want you to increase your awareness of responsible gambling or prevention problem gambling resources. We want you to become familiar with Connects Ontario. It's the problem gambling helpline. It's free, it's confidential, it's available in multiple languages, and it's available 24/7. Be aware of what your on-campus health, wellness, and counseling options are. So you can chat with somebody or call somebody or text somebody. Be aware of credit counseling services if you're in financial difficulty. They do a lot of work in this gambling field and can help, who would understand and can help you with that. Feel free to visit our RGC website. There's things that are specific for ages and demographics and languages and problem or safer, all sorts of things, treatment. It's really an excellent information spot. So we want you to try and increase your awareness of what you can do to help yourself or to help others. And then finally, give the people what they want. Preferred options is online. So 58% of people would like to be online chatting with someone. So maybe they don't feel comfortable face-to-face or sitting across from someone, which is liked by about 11% of people. And also by the telephone, 8%. I will be very interested to see as this research continues to see what other options are of interest, particularly for young adults. Okay, so let's talk about some tips for limiting risk as I come just to the end of my slides. Just really super quickly, everybody, we talked about problems, we talked about signs. Somebody is going to gamble. What would you say to them? What advice could you give to them? If I think it's me, I'm gonna play in an online poker group tonight. What advice would you tell me so I don't run into trouble? Can anybody think of something they could tell me? Excellent. Setting a money limit. Yep. Somebody's saying be careful of how much. What do you mean by how much? Money? Or time? Yes, money. Yep. I'm going to interpret or say it's also about time. Any idea what we could do to try and follow that? Yep. So what I would say, How do we stick to money limits and time limits? Minimize your access to money. Leave debit and credit cards at home if you're going to someplace land-based. Priyanshi, excellent. Set a timer. So use apps to limit your online spending or set a timer for yourself. Minimize your alcohol and drug use if you're gambling. Another key thing we'd have you share or to follow yourself is balance your gambling with other activities. Don't let gambling be the only thing you do for fun. It should be one of a number of different activities that you do. Movies, yoga, going for a walk, shopping, whatever it is. Don't let gambling be the only thing you do for fun. Become knowledgeable of options for help, and we talked about this in the previous slide. But I do want to say, you maybe want to learn how to talk to friends or family members in a non-stigmatizing way about their gambling. And if you do visit the RGC website, you'll see there's a section on that of how do you talk to a friend or a family member in a way that's helpful. So I think that list is excellent. On that note, I'm just going to say thank you so much for your contributions and your thoughts. I invite you to email me at the attached, following us on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter at RGC Game Plan. And finally, if you want to play our game, please feel free to go to checkyourreflex.ca or testezvosreflex.ca in French. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Lisa, for sharing with us the informative session on gambling. So we'll switch over into gaming, which still benefits us just without the financial risks of gambling. So gaming during quarantine has become more popular, especially with streaming services, Twitch, allowing gamers to make money off of viewers. It's a great way to create a side hustle and do something that you like. Gaming is also a good way to de-stress and take a break from reality, especially now with the global pandemic. It's been a great way for people to connect with others and make new friends. It can even act as a reward. So while we play the game, dopamine levels increase as we get excited. And when we aren't playing the game, but are still thinking about it, our serotonin levels increase and remind us how happy the game makes us feel, drawing gamers to play more. So it's important to be aware of when gaming is becoming a distraction from our responsibilities.
So we'd like to bring a question up for reflection for all of our audience members to think about. So our two questions are, how has quarantine impacted the way you or someone you know game? What do you think are some signs that gaming is interfering with your work or school life? So please feel free to drop your thoughts in the chat.
Thank you. Talking about balancing school and gaming, finding balance between and managing all the important things in your life. This can include gaming for many students. So here's some tips on balancing school and gaming for myself and the Party in the Right Spirit team members. First, schedule your time for working and playing. For instance, you can make a list of all the things that you want to complete for the day, including gaming, and you can maybe choose to play at nighttime if you feel like after you completed all your work. You can also include gaming as part of your reward after you complete a certain task, for example, after you read a chapter of a textbook or after you complete a lecture. And so try to make goals of what tasks you want to complete before you spend time gaming. You can also remove games from your study environment. Separating a study environment from your gaming environment can really help alleviate your temptation to play the games. And also, you don't have to completely remove gaming from your life. As mentioned previously, gaming can have many benefits. So removing it completely may cause you to binge playing games. So try to limit the amount of time that you spend gaming. For instance, you can set a timer. So check yourself before starting a new game, right when school starts or during exam week. It can be difficult to stop playing the new game, especially if it's really addicting, and it can cause you to fall behind on your schoolwork or procrastinate on studying. A tip from a UTSC psychology prof is that you feel better when you are stress-free or guilt-free gaming, which is basically gaming when you have completed all your work, in comparison to gaming while you're stressed when you have unfinished work. So it's really best to complete your work before you game. And finally, don't be afraid to ask the gaming community or your fellow gamer friends how they balance school with gaming. and what types of learning methods work for them, so you can start incorporating them into your lifestyle.
So what are some strategies you use to balance gaming or a hobby? For example, watching a show or reading a book with school. So we invite you to put your comments in the chat.
All right, thank you. Since it can be challenging for students to balance gaming or gambling with their responsibilities, here are some resources for support. The RGC website provides links to resources for gambling addiction support, can direct you to local help for problem gambling, can help you find help in Canada and United States, and there's also multilingual support as well. So we have the Health and Wellness Center here at UTSC, My SSP, which is the downloadable app, RGC, as I mentioned, and as we previously mentioned by Lisa, Connex Ontario, GamTalk, and CamH.
And so thank you all for coming today. Thank you to Priyanshi and Elizabeth from Party in the Right Spirit for this presentation. I will stay behind in Zoom for a few minutes if anyone would like to discuss, whether it's about today's presentation or other topics. The next wellness talk will take place on Thursday from 4 to 5:30, and it'll be about digital detox and will be presented by the mental wellness peers. We encourage you to sign up for this on CLN, and we hope to see you all there. And also a special thank you to Lisa from the RGC.